You know, what's interesting, Tom, is look, anybody who's been following college basketball for certainly the last, say, 15, 20 years, you know all about Gonzaga, about the success the teams have had, the great players. I mean, of course, dating back to John Stockton, but then also most recently, guys like Adam Morrison and all the guys that you named, Pangos and Turioff, and all the guys that have come through that program. And yet this year, why do you think nationally it seemed like people were still questioning how good is this team, even though all the power ratings, whether it's Ken Pom or Sagarin, they had them number one. The polls had them number one across the country, and yet those questions remained.
That part to me is a little bit fascinating, and I think that we kind of get painted into the corner of people think that our league is not very good. Our league is different than a lot of leagues. You know, we've got guards. You know, man, I want to say the last 3 or 4 years, we've had guards, at different programs who have been 2,000, point scorers. It's different. You know, we've got pick and pop fours. It's not big and physical like maybe some of the Power Fives. And I think people, look down on the WCC a little bit. And in some regards, I mean, nobody out here is ever going to claim, hey, we're as good as the ACC or, the Big Ten or the SEC. We all get that, and nobody ever tries to argue that. But I think that everybody is very easy to just fall back on, well, their league, isn't any good. It's like, well, you don't really watch anybody in our league play. So I think that happens a little bit where people just, automatically write off the league. And therefore, we can't be a good team because our league isn't any good, which I've never really understood that argument. I think there's some teams in some of those Power Fives that, that aren't necessarily very good, that get credit for being good just because they're in a Power Five. So I think that's a little bit of it. And then I also think people look back at history, and for whatever reason, I think a lot of people look at Gonzaga and say, well, you've never made the Final Four, so 2 decades of success means absolutely nothing because you've never been there. I mean, Coach Hughes won 82% of his games. And, you look at what we've done this year. I think we're 7-0 right now against top 25 teams. So it is always interesting for me to see, hey, let's look at today and let's look at what this team is today. And this is a darn good basketball team. But I will say, Michael, I think this year we've gotten a little more respect. I think people have seen it, and maybe because of those numbers, maybe there are a few other people, on the side of Gonzaga, from a standpoint of, hey, this actually might be a good basketball team, instead of just automatically going to the tried and true arguments that, the WCC is no good and they've never made it to the Final Four, therefore they can never be good or never be considered one of the greats in the country.
Well, Tom, I hope the people who I'm in the pools with also think that way, because I'm going to take Gonzaga pretty deep in my brackets, and I hope that will pay off for me. You were talking about the likes of some of those other Power 5 conferences and those teams there. What kind of matchup problems, if we see down the road here in the tournament, how will they do against the likes of Kansas or Villanova or North Carolina?
And I think that's interesting because I think with a lot of those teams personnel-wise this year, we match up. And like I say, when we've got a kid, Killian Tilly, who has a broken hand, who comes off the bench. He's a 6'10", kind of a four-man. And when you have a rotation of Karnowski and Williams starting, and then Collins, the McDonald's All-American, and another, really highly thought-of kid from Europe, you match up pretty well against anybody with that front line. And I think our guards match up pretty well with a lot of those teams. The one type of thing that I think you may run into problems with, that I think a lot of teams would, is, maybe somebody like West Virginia, right? Somebody who really gets up and presses you just in a one-game deal where, you turn it over a little bit. That was something that happened to us against BYU. I think we had 16 turnovers, and, the guards turned it over 10 times. And it was uncharacteristic, but you could see that maybe being a problem. Rebounding at times has been a little bit of an issue for this team. I know Nigel Williams-Goss was talking earlier this week about, hey, we need to get back because we've been winning so many games in the WCC by such large margins. Maybe they had lost a little bit of the attention to detail and blocking out and making sure that you're making the right plays. They've struggled a couple of times with rebounding it, and that might be, a problem against one of those, bigger, really talented teams. So I think those are the two things that kind of jump out at you. But I think physically, when you look at it, on paper going into a game, I don't know that there are many teams that Gonzaga would look at and say, we just don't belong on the floor with them. I think most games you'll go into and feel like, hey, you know what, we may have to play well, but we can still win this game. Where maybe in years past, you can say, okay, hey, man, we've got to, I remember the North Carolina game we played back in, I believe it was 2009. Like, okay, like we have to play really, really well, and they have to be really bad, and then we'll have a chance. And I think with this year's team, you look at it and say, hey, anybody that we play, I think you at least feel like going in that, if you play like you normally play, at least you've got a shot to win.